she was going to sit down, Bill, and I started laughing. She said, so because you're going to sit
All
down.
right. Test, test. It's time for us to get started, so if you'll... Well, that's one way to put it. That's one way to put it. I was trying to come up with a polite way to say, stop gabbing, but no, that's good. All right. So let's get started. We're going to be talking about biblical authority this trimester. So for the months of May, June, July, and August, we're going to be talking about Bible authority. And so I hope you'll indulge me just a little bit to sort of set up some of the, got to go through the preliminary stuff, make sure everybody's on the same page, figure out what we're doing here. Last week we handed out what I'm calling our textbook, which is a book called Mind Your King, Lessons and Essays on Biblical Authority. It's by Doy Moyer. First and foremost, I don't typically like teaching from books like this. I would rather be studying Mark with you, or Philippians or something like that. That's just the kind of study I like to do. But every once in a while, we think it's worthwhile to step aside and do a topical study. And when we do topical studies, sometimes it's helpful to have a guide like this. And so, usual caveats apply when you're reading this book. When I say usual caveats, I mean this book is written by a man. This is not scripture. These are not ideas. You will probably not agree with every idea in this book, and that's fine. Those kinds of things should always be understood when we're talking about a book written by a man, whether it's somebody we trust, whether it's somebody we don't trust. Just recognize it's written by a man that is fallible and all of those kinds of things. It is not scripture. You may not, you probably will not agree with everything that's said in it. This book that we're reading is not the final authority. We need to measure everything next to God's word. Okay, got all that out of the way. I think we all agree on that. That's great. That said, Doy Moyer, the author of this book, I don't know if y'all know Doy, but Doy Moyer has been incredibly influential on me as a Bible student. He's a faithful gospel preacher. I met Doy in Florida. He was teaching at the college that I attended, and his classes on evidences, hermeneutics, which is how to study the Bible, the study of how to study the Bible, and lessons specifically that he taught on authority have just, if you've heard me preach on authority, and all of you have, I think, it's going to sound a lot like this, because I relentlessly stole from Doy every time I preach on authority. And so he's been very influential to me on those kinds of things. And I hope that as we read this book and as we think about the teaching that he's done in this book, I hope that you'll find that he has a very easy, a very logical, and a very compelling way of writing and explaining really challenging concepts. So that's one of the things I've always appreciated about him. I found it true in his writing. And so that's one of the reasons I've recommended this book to a lot of people, and one of the reasons I'm asking us to read it throughout the course of this study. That said, again, this class is not a study of this book. Okay? So we're not studying Doy's book. We are using Doy's book as reading material to prepare us for the study at hand. And so you'll notice, if you looked at the schedule I sent out in the group we handed out a bunch of copies. If you need any of that, get with me afterwards and I'll share that with you. If you noticed, we're not just reading through the book. In fact, I just went full crazy mode, and I'm just like picking chapters here and there, and we're kind of all over the place. Part of that's the way the book is set up. There's 13 lessons at the beginning of the book, and then there's like 13 essays at the end of the book, and you kind of got to read them. If you want to read them together, that's helpful. But anyway, we're not studying Doy's book. We're using Doy's book to prepare us for our study. Okay. Comments or questions on that? Everybody good at the book? Everybody has a copy of the book? Raise your hand if you need a copy of the book. Okay, Charles needs a copy of the book. I don't have a copy of the book, so sorry. Yeah, it's already given away. So I've got more copies coming. Should be in the mail today. So, sorry, Charles. Have to make do for today. Yeah, I just wanted to know who needed it.
It is on Kindle.
Yes, you can buy it very inexpensively on Kindle if you like that, like $3, $2, something like that.
Free to me.
Okay.
Subscription,
Okay, so if you have the subscription to Kindle, maybe it's even free if you use that. That is obviously an option for you. We will have more physical books if you prefer that. Today we'll have them, just not for you today. Okay. Let me make a note on the schedule. I don't know if you have your schedule with you. I don't have it on the screen. I could have put it on the screen, but I didn't. Just to sort of prepare us for the direction we're going in this study, I like to think in terms of big groupings or big sections. And so maybe this will be helpful for you as we think about sort of the course for our study, kind of how we're going to process through this information. As we begin, we're going to have 3 lessons at the beginning of our study, including this one, that are really about understanding authority conceptually. So we have to understand what authority is. Like, how do we even begin to think about this concept? And so we're going to try to lay a groundwork with the first 3 lessons, trying to define our terms, understand what it is that we're talking about, and that's all kind of the boring stuff that maybe we our eyes sort of glaze over and we don't like to think about. But we have to do that first. After those first 3 lessons where we're trying to understand authority conceptually, the next 5 lessons are going to be about how we understand authority. Like, how is authority actually communicated or conveyed to us? So that's kind of where we're going to go from there. Okay, we know what authority is. How do we grasp the things that we're authorized to do? How do we come to understand those things? And then I think, if I've done my math right, there's 7 lessons remaining. And those last 7 lessons, or kind of the last half of the class, what we're going to do is we're going to look at practical examples of how this plays out in action. Like, okay, we know what authority is. We have some understanding about how it's communicated to us. What does that look like when we're trying to make decisions about our lives, about the church, about how we function, about how we work together? And so that's kind of the path we're taking. We've got to sort of start with the foundation, and we'll build towards more practical things at the end. But as we get started today, we're going to try to answer 2 questions to sort of get us off the ground and running. We want to talk about, or ask the question, what is authority? That's the first question. We've got to just define our terms first. If we're going to have a meaningful conversation about these things, we all have to be on the same page about what we're talking about. So what is authority, and why should we care? Why are we sitting here having this Bible study? What's so significant about that? So those are the 2 questions we're going to answer today. That is my introduction to the course. Any comments or questions about what we're doing, why we're doing it? Yes, sir.
I'm not sure. I see what you say about part 1. One is 4. I'm reading what it says at the bottom. But please explain that, because I don't really know how. I don't understand how to follow that.
Yeah, you're talking about the way I've indicated that on the schedule?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, I was worried that might be confusing, so I tried to put a little explanation. But the way I've indicated the readings on the schedule, if you look down that close to the middle column under readings, I've designated the chapters with a 2-digit system. 1, then a period, then another number, or 2, period, then another number. And all that indicates is, if you look in the table of contents of the book, there's 2 parts to the book. And so if I've indicated 1 point something, that's part 1. So that's going to be the lessons portion of the book, and then the chapter in that heading. And then if it's 2 point something, it's the essays portion of the book, that second portion of the book. And the reason I did that is because he didn't number the chapters straight through. He starts the numbering over. And so that was my attempt to make that clear. Does that make sense, Greg? No? Okay. Meet with the teacher after class, and we'll chat about it. So. Okay. Is there anybody else who's unclear about that? I want to make sure that we are clear. But if you have any questions about what the reading is, feel free to shoot me a text or give me a call or come up, find me afterwards. But the first digit in the reading indicates the part of the book. Then the second number indicates the chapter or the lesson within that part. Okay. Any other comments or questions before we jump into these 2 questions for the day? All right. Well, let's start here then. And I'm trusting that you've read the material. I'm trusting that you've sort of primed yourself for the conversation. And so let's just think about this word a little bit. What is authority? What exactly are we talking about? And so I'm gonna give you an opportunity. If somebody comes up and they say, you have a Bible class on authority, I don't know what you're talking about, how would you explain it to them? What is authority? Okay, what God says. Okay, in a very basic way, that's simply what we're trying to talk about. What is it that God says? And maybe I'd add that we need to do, right? Yeah, yeah.
It's the source of the guidance of your life, or,
Okay,
where does how are you guided in your life?
yeah. What is it that gives you direction? What is it that gives you guidance? We might call that authority, right? That voice or that authority that tells us which way we need to go, right? Okay, good.
It's whoever you answer to.
Okay, yeah, if we sort of take a step back, right, and we've sort of done that in these three answers, we started with it, well, it's what God tells us to do. That's true. We take a step back, the authority is a bigger term than even just what God says in some sense, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but authority is really more about God, just generally what guides us. Authority is ultimately whatever it is that you answer to, right? It's whatever it is that resides above you on the food chain, right? Not literally, but it's whatever resides above you that gets to give you orders, gets to tell you what to do. Yeah. What else? What is authority? Yes.
The dictionary definition: a legitimate power, right, or permission to demand, make decisions, influence behavior, and it gives aspects are legitimate power, expertise, authorization, and governance.
All right. Which dictionary?
Merriam-Webster.
Merriam-Webster. Good. Okay. I pulled a definition off of the new Oxford American Dictionary that I'll share in just a minute. But yes, so a lot of those concepts there again, I heard words like power, rule, some things about the ability to demand people do things, some concepts like that. Jenny, did I hear your voice?
The right to rule.
Okay, the right to rule. The right to rule. Okay, good. Good. What else? Anything else?
I just think of Romans 13:1, where it says that every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities, but then it says, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist are established by God. So that's not really a definition of authority, but it's telling us where we get it from.
Sure, it speaks to the source of authority, ultimately, which gets us back to Chaina's original comment, right? It's what God says. Really, all authority, no matter who it is you answer to, no matter what it is that's guiding you, it should be founded in what God says, because God, according to Romans 13 and other passages that we can look at, God is the ultimate authority. He's the ultimate one who has the right to rule. Okay? Good. Yeah, what else? What is authority? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I think of like when a policeman arrests you, or you're in with a judge, they do what they do by the authority given to them by whatever, the state. So in that sense, the same thing. Anything that we do, we should have authority in the sense that it's not what we chose, it's in the higher rules that were already made. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. You're bringing up a good illustration of authority, the idea of like a police officer. And there's a couple of different directions that authority goes, right? So we recognize that a police officer has authority over us. He has the authority to tell us what to do.
But they got that authority. In the law, in the sense of those rules, they're not their rules.
Right.
They're answering to a higher
Right,
person that set the rules.
which is the other direction that authority goes, is they didn't take that for themselves. It was granted to them by the law of the land, by the king or the president or the constitution, or what, however it is we describe that based on our culture and our nation. That authority is given to them, but then we recognize that they then have the power or the authority to exert some influence on us or direct us in certain ways. So, yes, sir. Yeah, Greg.
Invested power to control.
Okay, invested power to control. Good, good. Good. Yeah, Andre.
In the dictionary definition, I guess that's part
interesting.
a knowledge base that goes with it.
Yeah.
Almost like, after the Sermon on the Mount with Jesus, like, he taught us one to have authority, not like described, but there was this level of expertise and knowledge.
Yeah, we talk that way a lot about like academics, like, oh, he's an authority in his field of study because he has the knowledge to back that up. And even then, I think that's sort of the same concept. What is it that grants them the ability or the right to talk about this subject? Well, what grants them that authority is the knowledge that they've gained, the teaching that they have. So you can kind of see how it relates, but that is sort of an interesting layer. When we think about God's authority, part of that is that he has the expertise to know what is right and wrong and to direct us in that way. Ty?
When people are married, usually they're married by the authority of Texas and God.
Okay.
State of Texas and God.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's said, by the preacher.
Yeah. Yeah. So we use authority in a lot of different settings in life, and we've already brought up a lot of illustrations. And I think that's good for us to recognize here early on. And as we think about defining this term, I want to be really clear about this. And I may say this again, so if I start to sound like a broken record, sorry, you get what you get. But authority is not some abstract spiritual discussion that we only have when we come to church, right? I think, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but based on conversations I've been a part of or have heard, not here, I'm just talking about generally conversations I've been a part of, I think there's a sense that goes something like this. Well, you're just concerned about authority because you don't understand what true religion is supposed to look like, or something like that. Like authority is some just sort of spiritual, mystic thing that only matters in church. That's not the case at all. This is not a mystical word. This is not a magical or spiritual kind of connotation or word. This is just a word that we use literally all the time. And even if we don't use the word all the time, there are settings where we use the word. Ty mentioned like the wedding ceremonies or this. Sometimes we talk about the authority of police officer. Like we talk about it sometimes that way. But even when we don't use the word, we have this concept, I think, firmly rooted in our minds. So in some ways, I feel kind of silly asking this question because, of course, we know what authority is. Like, obviously, everybody recognizes some kind of authority. But so that we have clarity on what we're talking about, I think it's really important to sit here and kind of parse this out. Doy Moyer on page 12 offered his definition for authority, and I'll just read that for us just because it was in the reading I asked you to do. Moyer said that authority is the power to make and enforce laws, to command, determine, judge, or exact obedience. Okay, so that's a lot of what we've already said, which is good. This is the definition I pulled off of the new Oxford American Dictionary, which I mentioned I would throw up here in a minute. And I like this definition because I think it's simple and it's clear, but it also shows, I think, two very important aspects of authority. So this is the way the new Oxford American Dictionary defines authority. Authority is the power or right to give orders, make decisions, and enforce obedience. Again, that's a lot of the things we've already seen. It's also, the dictionary goes on to say, the right to act in a specified way delegated from one person or organization to another. So I think on a very basic level, we all understand this. And at some point, you're probably just saying, okay, like we get it. We know what authority means. You can stop talking about it. But I think we all grasp what authority is. We can identify authority figures. We know intuitively that those people get to make and enforce rules. But I want us to challenge us to think more carefully about this word. Notice in this definition, there are two aspects to authority, and we need to kind of start thinking in this direction if we're going to understand really what we're talking about here in this class. When we talk about authority in English, this is the way we talk about authority. There are two different, though related, ways that we use the word authority. First, authority can be used to describe the person that has the power to make decisions or rules or laws or edicts, right? That's that policeman. That's that person that has the authority. That's the state of Texas in the marriage process, right? They have the authority to do something or to make some law or make some injunction or make some command, right? Second, and related to it, we also use the word authority to describe what the person has who is being directed by the initial one who has the power, right? So, what I often say at the end of wedding ceremonies is by the power invested in me by the state of Texas, right? And what I mean by that is the state of Texas is the one who's granted me the ability to issue this marriage license, but I don't have that within myself. It's something that has been delegated to me. And only because Texas gives me that authority do I have the right to go perform this wedding ceremony, right? So, authority then is two sides of a coin. We can use the word in both directions. Authority is the power or right to give orders, and it's also the right to act when an order has been given. Can we talk about this for just a minute? Again, you're probably like, I get it, you don't have to go over it, but I think we do. Authority is first. I like Jenny's definition, short, sweet, to the point. Authority is the right to rule. That's the first part of this. It's the right to make rules. It's the right to say, I'm in charge, and you have to do what I say. If somebody has authority, there's a sense in which they have that right. That is to say, some people inherently possess authority based on a position or a role that they possess. Can y'all think of examples of that? We've talked about some. The police officer, state of Texas in some sense.
Ultimately, God has the authority.
Right.
He made us.
Right. So this is where we're going.
Created us.
This is where we're going. Who ultimately has all authority? Well, it's God. And it's because of the role he has, the position he has as creator, he gets to say whatever goes, right? And so that's what we talk about, God's authority. Yeah,
We
Norma?
don't have the right to change what is written.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
We don't have the right to change what is written.
Yes. Yeah, we don't have that right because we don't have the same position that God has. God has the right to rule, we don't.
Which is done all the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me get Jessica and then Greg.
Are you looking for like examples just in like regular life?
Yeah. What kind of people?
God has authority over his employees. The parents have authority over the children. The
Sure.
teachers have authority over their classroom. Just different hierarchies.
Yeah. Yeah. And we would acknowledge that those people have authority to rule in their sphere of authority based on what? Their position. Because they're the teacher. Because they're the parents. Because they're the boss or the manager or the CEO. They have authority because of their position in their sphere of authority to make the rules. To say what happens, right? Greg, did you have a comment there?
Does the right give you the authority, or does the authority give you the authority? I'm sorry, does the right give you the power, or does the power give you the right?
I'm not sure. I would have to sit and think about that. That sounds like a brain twister.
What do you say?
Okay.
Does the right give you the power, or the power give you the right?
Does the right give you the power, or does the power give you the right?
Right. Another way of saying, does the right give you the authority, or does the authority give you the right?
Yeah.
Just the
Yeah. I'd have to sit and think about that. I think my answer would be it depends on which definition of authority you're using, right? So, yeah. 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 Do you have an answer to the question, or you're just thinking it out loud?
I would say it depends upon the circumstances.
Yeah.
For example, we say, who are you to assume authority? Like in the Bible, we got on Moses. Who are you? He was exercising an authority. But they said, well, who are you? So the idea is, I think it comes out of the situation.
Yeah.
I think it's the situation.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that, I'm using in the conversation right now, I'm using the term role. What role you have in the scenario, in the situation, I think goes a long way towards determining who has authority to rule, who has the right to make the rules, right? And certainly, you brought up the example of Moses. Well, what gave Moses the authority? Well, of course, we can go all the way back to God. God has the ultimate authority. But in that situation, God put him in a role, in a position to be the one who distributed the rules to the people. And so that's kind of why I'm harping on role here right now. But yeah, I'm going to have to think about your brain twister there in the week ahead. Okay, yes?
Could you sort of say that the elders rule our congregation based on the authority given to them by God?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Now, exactly what that rule looks like is governed by Scripture, and there are instruction. Sometimes we hear the word rule and we think like overlords, right? And Peter's very clear. They're not to lord it over the flock.
As instructed.
Yeah. They've been given some kind of authority position to oversee, to make sure things are running the way God sees fit. And that's a role that God has put them in because of that. And so in that sense, elders have a sort of right to rule over the church. Absolutely. Vicki?
Well, I was just thinking, in a way, there's two types, because there is that, like a parent or a husband, or, something that is already set by God, or it just happens, like when you have a child, you're automatically the authority over that child. But then you have those that choose to be an authority, like a policeman or something like that. They're not born with that right.
I see.
They chose that right, but by doing that, they had to go back and study the rules of authority.
Oh, I
They
see.
can't just go and do what they want. They're like a representative
Yeah.
of the authority.
Well, and this is where it becomes, we have to equate God into the equation. We have to go to Romans 13 and bring in the fact that all authority is given by God, ultimately. Because, if y'all can come up with a counter to this, feel free, but I'm off the top of my head, I'm thinking about what Vicki said here. I think every earthly authority has a choice in becoming that authority, right? People choose to run for office. People choose to become parents. People choose to become teachers or something. There's some choice that's made, and because there's a choice, it's not something they're just born into. There's a delegation of that authority to them. Somebody higher than them has to give them that authority. That's where we ultimately get back to God. All authority, no matter what we're talking about, no matter what role we're talking about here, all authority ultimately resides in God because He alone is the creator of all things. So if we kind of take it back to its necessary end, I think that becomes important. Ty and then Timothy?
The congregation also gives the elders the authority. Just
Okay.
like we choose to be subject to that authority, except for God. And God
Okay.
has no choice. We are under His authority, period.
Okay. Yeah, so there's a willfulness of the congregation to submit to authority that in a sense grants it to them.
And throughout all the authorities, even on earth, we choose to be under that authority.
Okay.
Except for when we're forced.
Okay, good. Timothy?
As a surveyor, I have a lot of conversations with people about authority because we have to make decisions as to where property corners are. And a lot of the times when you set the property corners where the boss decided where to put it, it's gone. Nobody knows where it is. You'll have people come and say, well, that's not right. And you say, well, this guy has the authority vested in him by the state of Texas. And if you can agree with that authority, but if you don't, you're welcome to pull it out. But if the board catches on to that, that's a $10,000 fine. And so then you've given them an option. We've agreed that the state of Texas is an authority, but if you want to fight the state of Texas, they're going to go for your wallet. And I think that's an example of we have agreed upon authority, and we also have where a lot of the time authority carries a sword. I think Romans 13 talks about that.
Sure.
God tells us we need to respect authority because authority has a sword and they're not afraid to use it.
Yeah.
In contrast, however, if I told him I'm setting this by the authority vested in me by the country of Mexico, they're going to say, well, I'm ripping it out because I don't live in Mexico. And so
Yeah.
there's some authority that tries to say that they're in charge of us, like say the Catholic Church, that we say, well, I could care less about what the Pope says.
Mexico is an authority, just
Yes.
not here and over us. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Yeah, Norma.
Do you know by the same
authority to rule over the Garden of Eden, you know, they could, but then they decided to violate that authority and do something else. And that's how people do. That authority goes to their head, and they want to go beyond that, and they said, oh, I've got the authority, so I'm gonna do this, and then they start violating that authority and let it go to their heads and say, well, I've got the authority to do this, so I'm gonna go do this, and they
I
go
see.
beyond that, and sin then comes in.
Yeah, yeah. All sin is the rejection of God's authority. That's in one, I mean, there's a number of ways we could define sin, but that's one foundational way to define it. Sin is the rejection of God's authority. It's looking at God and saying, I don't want you to be making the rules or being the power in my life to tell me what to do. I don't want that.
And that's where prayer should come in, when all authority, when you've got the authority as a husband, pray to God that because he's given you that authority over your spouse, and pray to him. And the same way with elders. Elders should pray to God to lead the flock well, and even deacons pray that they take care of so that the elders can take care of the spiritual things, and they will be a help to them in everything we should.
I like the way Peter puts it in connection specifically with elders, but I think the principle applies. Peter talks about shepherd the flock of God among you. This is 1 Peter 4, I think. Shepherd the flock of God among you, over which God has made you overseers, not lording it over the flock, because you have a shepherd over you. You have somebody who serves, who is your authority, right? So any one of us who are in any position of authority, no matter how great or small that may be, we have to remember that God is our authority greater than us.
Just like us as teachers, and should pray that we that are now going on to this trimester, pray to God that we're doing the right thing and teaching the children
Absolutely.
correctly.
Absolutely. It's a big responsibility. Jessica? Yeah. Yes. The great wisdom of Marvel comic strips. Yes, with great power comes great responsibility. In the words of Uncle Ben. Greg. I think I would answer that as yes, but that power may not always look the same, and by power I don't think we have to mean some, I'll use this word, although this may just muddy the water. We use the word authoritarian sometimes, and I don't think all authority has to be authoritarian in nature, if that makes sense. But yes, I think authority carries with it a sense of you have the power to make rulings, to make decisions, to make,
Does that source have to be recognized as legitimate power? In other words, in other words, you could have illegitimate power.
yeah.
You could have assumed
Oh, sure. Yeah. There are people who claim authority who have no right to it, and they do, sometimes cruel and horrible things with that power, even though there's no true authority or power backing their authority. Absolutely. Yes, Vicky, and then I do want to move on here. Yeah.
He just said something that I was like, okay, what I was trying to get to earlier was source. Like he said the word, and I was like, oh, that's what I'm
Yeah.
doing. So, because like a policeman has a source to his authority, and he can't go beyond that, whether it's too strict or too
Okay.
loose. And like he can't pull you over and say, okay, now do hopscotch and I'll let you go off.
Right.
He can't change the authority that gave the original.
Sure. And if he does, he has authority, he's exerting authority, but it's not from a true power source. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this next definition, though. So authority is the right to rule. It's that person who has the ability to say, I'm in charge, I'm making the rules here because of their position, because of their role in their sphere of authority. Authority is also, according to the New American Oxford Dictionary, the right to act in a specific way. In other words, we don't always use the word authority to mean I have the power to make rules and do orders. Sometimes we say I have authority, and what we mean is simply I have no right to make rules. I only have the right to follow rules, right? So sometimes we'll say, well, do you have, we'll use it this way a lot of times when we're talking about things in the church. Do we have authority to do this or that? Well, we're not saying, do you have the right to make up whatever rules you want to do this or that? What we're asking is, do you have the ability, or have you been given the permission by a source of authority to do whatever it is you're wanting to do, right? So authority is the right to rule, but it's also the right to act. Some people are granted or delegated the authority to do something from somebody who has the authority to rule or give commands. And we're familiar with some of this, and I'll just rattle off a few examples here. I think about like driver's license. I think this was an example Doy used in the book. Driver's license. Like that license is a document that shows that an authority figure, state of Texas, has given you the authority to go drive. Now, if Amos, my Amos, jumped into Bill's car after this and decided he was going to take it for a test drive, we would look at that. We might not say these words, but we would understand the concept. He doesn't have the authority to do that. The state of Texas certainly didn't give him the authority to do that. I, as his parent, didn't give him the authority to do that. Bill definitely didn't give him the authority to do that. He wasn't given any permission to do that. And so we recognize that somebody has to have authority to act in a certain way from somebody who is higher than them. This is an important observation, and I'm going to say this again because I think this is truly important that we understand. What we're obviously ultimately interested in here, and we've talked about it at some points along the way, we're interested in biblical authority. That's what we're talking about this trimester. We're concerned with God's authority. We want to know how authority impacts our spiritual lives. We want to know how authority impacts our religious lives. Who gets to make the rules? Who gets to tell us what we do spiritually, what choices we make in the church, what choices we make? That's what we're concerned with. Who makes the final rules for my life, right? But part of that as well is we need to stop and understand and ask the question, how do I know if I have been granted the ability or the authority to do this thing? So those are two questions that are related, and we need to think about both of them if we're going to understand biblical authority. But we need to start here by understanding, and this is where I'm going to sound like a broken record, authority is not some mystical spiritual concept. Authority is a fundamental concept that we are all familiar with, and we compute this naturally. Like we are ingrained from a young age to understand power dynamics, to understand authority figures, to understand who has authority and who doesn't. And sometimes from a young age, we recognize those people have authority and I don't like that they have authority, and we buck against that authority, but we understand intuitively from a young age the existence of authorities, and that we want to recognize, either we want authority for ourselves or we want to recognize who has authority in our lives. And so as we go throughout this study and we think about biblical authority, we need to realize that this isn't anything that we don't already know. We just have to apply it consistently when it comes to the Bible. So when it comes to the Bible, there's a clear distinction between the right to rule and the right to act. But both of those have to do with the power dynamics of God as sole authority and us as creatures who cannot direct our own steps. That's what Jeremiah 10:23 says. Okay, let me ask this question in the last 5 minutes. Why should we care? Well, why do we spend all of this time, and we're going to spend 4 months on it, on authority? Why is this a topic that we should be thinking about? Charles?
I think it's so important right now because you see a lot of people leaving the church for more progressive ideas and things like that. And they seem to emphasize their feelings and emotions over facts. And there is such a thing as objective truth that comes from Bible's word. When they take the Bible and the Bible is downplayed as not necessarily God's word, that it ceases to, and their feelings override that. I think we have to realize that they're putting their feelings over God's ultimate authority that He's given us for our faith and our practice of how we do things. So it's very dangerous, I think, if we don't understand authority and that there is such a thing as authority.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that impacts a lot of people. I think we would probably say young people, but the reality is there's a lot of older people too that don't recognize the authority of God or don't care to pause and ask the question, is this something that God wants? Is this something that God authorizes? And so, yeah, it's important for us to slow down and ask, not just does this make me feel good or does this make me feel right, but is this actually something that God has said in some form or fashion pleases Him, right? Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about some of these sources of authority that people will go to, and one of them is their feelings. If we fly by, well, this feels right to me, then that's become what you set up as your authority, and it's a false authority. It's not going to work. Let me get Ty and then Greg. Yeah.
Paul asked the Galatians, am I seeking the favor of men or of God? So that's the same thing we're asking. Do we seek God's authority or do we seek man's authority?
Yeah. Who are we trying to make happy? Who are we trying to please with our lives? Is it man or is it God? One of those is the right authority to seek. One is not. Greg?
Well, authority is important because it establishes and maintains structure. Without authority, you're not going to ever establish structure. You're not going to ever maintain structure. That's true in the church.
Yeah. So authority as a concept, the authority of God itself, maintains structure to what we're doing with our lives, what we're doing with the church, right? If you don't have a source of authority, then it's just free reign. Whatever you think is fine, whatever I think is fine. By the way, that's the way our world talks. I'm okay, you're okay, you just do what you think is right, I'll do what I think is right. God doesn't really care anyway. I don't know that that's true. I think God does care. When we read the Bible, I think it's clear that God is a God of power and authority and direction and guidance, and He has this will, and He imposes it on us, right?
The chapter points out Isaiah 52:7, where it talks about God reigning and that our salvation comes through His kingship. So
Yeah.
we need to care about authority because God's authority leads to salvation.
Yeah, so Isaiah 52 is sort of that's the whole beginning of this book. I think he'll probably come back to this a lot in the book. The very notion that the gospel message, we talk about the gospel, a lot of people talk about the gospel. Jesus died, He was buried, He was raised, great story that is the foundation of our salvation. It is everything that we preach and teach and hope for and try to live. But embedded within that, when Isaiah talked about the beautiful feet, he quoted in Romans 10, right? The beautiful feet of those who bring the message of salvation. If you go back and read Isaiah, right in there in that statement is this idea that your God reigns. Without the reign of God, there is no salvation. Because somebody has to have authority to say who's saved and who's not. Somebody has to be in that position of authority to make that statement. And if we just say, God's authority doesn't really matter, it doesn't care, I'll just do what I want to do, God, whatever God says in the Bible, it's just sort of suggestions or whatever, that's not going to cut it. Because as soon as you take that road, you reject the very standard, the very authority that grants you the ability to be saved by the gospel in the first place. All right, there's probably more we could say, but I appreciate the conversation. Thank you so much. Go ahead and read the next couple of readings, which, by the way, I'll say right now are going to come from the second part of the book. So if you are in the book and you go to the second, part 2, with essays, it's going to be the third essay and the 10th essay in that back half of the book. So good luck. If you have questions, let me know.